You won't believe what happened when a kind woman was tricked into marriage by a man who seemed humble but had a dark secret. As she fell for his lies, little did she know he was about to trap her in a golden prison where the truth would shatter everything. Stay tuned to see what unfolds. In the heart of the peaceful village of Dambara lived a young woman named Zulekha, whose beauty wasn't just in her face, but in the way she cared for others. She was 22, but her soul felt older, shaped by loss and love. After her father, the village's respected herbalist, passed away, Zulekha stepped into his shoes without hesitation. She gathered leaves with care, crushed roots with wisdom, and mixed oils with a healing touch that felt like magic. People from nearby villages came to her with fever, wounds, and heartbreak, and they always left with more than a cure. They left with hope. Zulekha's hut was always busy. Children came for herbs, elders came for her advice, and animals followed her like she was part of the earth itself. Her laughter filled the marketplace like sweet music, and even the grumpiest traders smiled when she passed. But what made her special wasn't her healing hands, it was her heart. She gave without asking. She helped without expecting anything in return. And when the richest men came to offer her gold and marriage, she turned them away with a gentle smile. She wanted a man who saw her soul, not her skills. She believed in love, real love, the kind that didn't wear fine clothes or ride on horses. She's different, the villagers would whisper. She's not meant for this place. She will marry someone powerful, a prince maybe. But Zulekha didn't care for titles. She believed in destiny, and deep inside she felt it. Something was coming. Her life would not always be rooted in the soil of Dambara. Something was stirring in the winds she used to talk to. Something she couldn't see yet, but could feel. And just when the flowers began to bloom that year, he arrived. A stranger with tired shoes and soft eyes. A man who called himself Kilonzo. He looked lost, almost broken. The villagers didn't trust him. But Zulekha, she felt a pull. He wasn't like the others. He asked nothing of her. Instead, he listened, watched, waited. And Zulekha, who had never let her guard down, began to open the gates of her heart, unaware that this stranger carried secrets as heavy as iron, hidden beneath smiles and dust. She had no idea her quiet world was about to twist, and that the man who seemed so humble was about to turn her life upside down, not with love, but with lies. And so, the story of Zulekha began. One warm afternoon, the peaceful rhythm of Dambara was disturbed by the arrival of a stranger. His clothes were simple, his sandals worn, and his smile seemed soft and tired. He carried nothing but a small bag and a gentle voice. His name was Kilonzo. The villagers, always cautious with outsiders, eyed him with suspicion, but Zulekha, with her open heart, offered him water and asked no questions. He said he was a trader, traveling from village to village, trying to make an honest living. He spoke of hunger and hardship, of sleeping under trees and begging for meals, but it was all a lie. Kilonzo was not a poor man. He was the son of a wealthy chief from the distant land of Lojera, a place of gold, palaces, and scandal. Back home, he was known for deceit, caught in lies, gambling, and betrayal. To escape shame and punishment, he fled his land, hiding his true identity beneath a poor man's disguise. But even in hiding, he had a plan. A cruel, clever plan. He wanted to find a wife who was pure, obedient, and easy to control. And when he saw Zulekha, radiant in her simplicity, he knew she was the one. He didn't approach her right away. He watched. From behind corners and from the edge of the marketplace, he studied her. He saw how she gave medicine to a crying mother without asking for payment. He noticed how she carried old women's baskets on market day. She didn't wear jewels. She didn't care for riches. She had no pride, only grace. That's when Kilonzo smiled to himself. If I show her wealth, she'll keep her distance. She's not like those greedy women back home. But if I act poor, if I let her believe I'm just a humble man with no one in the world, she'll open her heart to me. And so, the act began. He helped old men in the fields. He sat near the well, telling stories of how he once had a family, but lost them to sickness. He complimented the children and gave his last piece of bread to a hungry goat. Every move was calculated. Every smile was part of the trap. And slowly, Zulekha began to notice him, not as a liar or a threat, but as someone gentle, someone kind, someone like her. She didn't know he had hidden gold sewn into the seams of his rags. She didn't know he wrote letters at night to his servant in Lojera, giving secret instructions. All she saw was a man trying to survive. And as the days passed, her heart began to whisper things her mind couldn't understand. Kilonzo, the stranger with tired eyes, was getting closer, and his lies were sinking deeper. Kilonzo knew how to play with emotions like strings on a drum. One morning, he stumbled into the village square, holding his side, limping and groaning in pain. He claimed he had fallen while chopping firewood near the river. Villagers stood back, unsure, but Zulekha, as always, stepped forward with gentle hands and worried eyes. She led him to her hut, cleaned his wounds, and gave him a place to rest. It was all part of his act, scratches made with thorns, bruises rubbed in with berries. But to Zulekha, he looked like a man fighting silently against life's cruelty. Each day, he wove more lies, feeding her with stories that made her heart ache. He told her he had once had a sister who died in a fire, a mother lost to a long illness, and a father who abandoned him as a child. He described sleeping under the stars with an empty belly, walking miles just to find a single meal. His eyes would glisten at just the right moment, and his voice would crack with perfect timing. Zulekha, with her soft heart, believed every word. She gave him food, space in her small hut, and even began teaching him about herbs and healing. As days turned to weeks, the bond between them grew. Zulekha started laughing more when he was around, and Kilonzo watched her with eyes that sparkled, though not with love, but with victory. He could see her falling, piece by piece, and he was ready for the final move. One evening, as the sky painted itself with purple and gold, and the crickets began their song, Kilonzo sat beside Zulekha under the tall baobab tree. He looked at her like she was the last light in his dark world. Then, in a voice full of softness and false hope, he whispered, "Zulekha, marry me. I have nothing to offer, no land, no cattle, but together we can build something from nothing. I've never met anyone like you. You're my peace." Zulekha's breath caught. She looked into his eyes and saw what she thought was sincerity. Her heart, already softened by his stories and his wounds, finally gave in. With tears in her eyes, she nodded and said yes. The village erupted in joy. Women ululated, men danced, and children ran around with flowers. They believed love had won, that two good souls had found each other. No one knew they were blessing a lie. No one saw the shadows behind Kilonzo's smile. He had won her heart, not with truth, but with clever, well-placed lies. And as Zulekha smiled through the celebration, thinking she had found a partner for life, Kilonzo looked up at the stars, knowing he had just trapped her in a beautiful cage. The morning sun had barely risen when Kilonzo packed a small bag and asked Zulekha to follow him. She was still glowing with joy from the wedding celebration, her heart full of dreams for a simple, peaceful life with the man she believed had struggled like her. She thought they would move to a small piece of land nearby, maybe build a new hut together and start fresh. But as they walked further away from Dambara, her smile began to fade. The path was unfamiliar, the trees grander, the air filled with silence instead of birdsong. After hours of walking, they reached tall iron gates guarded by men in crisp uniforms. Behind the gates stood a mansion that shimmered in the sunlight. Stone walls, glass windows, carved doors, and a wide courtyard filled with fountains. Zulekha froze. Her feet refused to move. Her hands trembled. "What is this place?" she whispered, looking around in confusion. Kilonzo didn't blink. "My home," he said with a cold smile. "This is where I truly belong." Zulekha turned to him, her eyes wide. "Your home? But I thought you were poor." He chuckled softly, then waved his hand toward the servants who bowed in silence. "That was a test. I wanted to know if your love was real, if you would choose me without gold and glory. And you did. So congratulations. You passed." Her heart sank. Every story, every tear, every moment they had shared now felt like poison in her chest. "So you lied?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I simply hid the truth," Kilonzo said, adjusting his fine robe. "A necessary lie, my dear. Look at this place. Most women would be thrilled. You should feel honored to live here." But Zulekha didn't feel honored. She felt betrayed, trapped, like a bird that had been lured with seeds and then locked in a cage of gold. She stood among riches she had never asked for, beside a man she no longer recognized. The quiet, humble traveler was gone. In his place stood a stranger, one who played with love like it was a game, who wore lies like jewelry. Inside the mansion, everything sparkled. Floors that reflected the sky, walls lined with rare silk, and servants who never met her eyes. But all Zulekha saw was emptiness. Her heart had been drawn to a man of kindness, not a master of masks. And now she was in a palace built on deception, far from the village, far from truth, and far from the life she thought she was choosing. The man she had married was not poor. He was rich, in secrets. Days turned into weeks, and Zulekha's heart grew heavier with each sunrise. The mansion that looked like a dream now felt like a golden prison. She could walk on polished floors, eat food served in gold dishes, and wear the finest silk, but none of it brought her peace. Kilonzo had changed. He no longer smiled gently or spoke with softness. He gave orders, sharp and cold, and expected obedience. She asked to visit Dambara, to check on the sick elders, or help a woman with childbirth, but Kilonzo said no. That life is over. You belong here now, he told her firmly. She tried to reason, but he silenced her with a raised hand or a locked door. Guards followed her everywhere, even inside the gardens. They watched her like she was a thief, not a wife. The freedom she once had, walking barefoot by the river, laughing with children, dancing during moon festivals, was gone. One day, she found her herb pouch and healing oils missing. When she asked Kilonzo, he showed no remorse. I burned them, he said casually. No more of your village nonsense. You're a noblewoman now. Act like it. His words cut deep. Her healing hands, once so cherished by the villagers, now felt useless. She felt like a stranger in her own skin. She cried alone at night, curled on silk sheets that felt colder than stone. Her laughter, once the music of Dambara, had vanished. The woman who used to bring hope now struggled to hold on to her own. The mansion's beauty became a curse. Shiny walls that echoed her pain, high ceilings that trapped her sobs. In all the darkness, there was only one small light, Yamba, a quiet housemaid with gentle eyes and silent steps. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her voice was warm. She noticed Zulekha's sadness and began offering small kindnesses, a warm cloth for her tears, hidden herbs wrapped in cloth, and quiet company during lonely nights. Yamba never asked questions, never pried, but her presence became a balm to Zulekha's aching soul. Sometimes they would sit near the garden window in silence, watching the birds fly freely, just as Zulekha once did. It was in those silent moments that Zulekha found strength, like tiny seeds of hope planted deep in sorrow. But the walls around her were still tall, and Kilonzo's control tightened. Every smile she forced, every step she took in that house, felt like a performance. Her heart whispered for freedom, but her reality screamed captivity. She was not a queen. She was a prisoner in silk, locked in a golden cage built on lies, with only a silent maid and fading memories of Dambara to remind her who she truly was. That night, the silence in the mansion was thicker than usual. Zulekha lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how her life had turned so dark. Then, without a sound, her door creaked open. It was Yamba. Her steps were careful, like someone who had walked that path in secret many times before. She closed the door gently behind her and came closer. Zulekha sat up, alarmed. But before she could speak, Yamba raised a finger to her lips. "Quiet," she whispered. "They listen, even through the walls." Then Yamba reached into her robe and pulled out a small, folded paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she gave it to Zulekha. "You are not the first," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "There were others, women who came before you, kind, gentle, full of dreams, but they disappeared." Zulekha unfolded the paper. It was a letter. The ink faded but still readable. The words were full of fear and warning. The woman who wrote it spoke of being lured in with lies, then locked away, just like Zulekha. She tried to escape. She failed. No one had seen her since. Zulekha's heart pounded. Her hands shook. "What happened to her?" she whispered. Yamba looked down. "No one knows, but I've been watching. I knew from the start. You were different. You still have a chance." That moment shattered something inside Zulekha, her last hope that maybe Kilonzo's lie was just a test of love. Now she saw the truth. He was dangerous, and she was trapped in a story that had already ended badly for others. Her golden prison wasn't just about control. It was about survival. She looked at Yamba, eyes wide with fear and determination. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Yamba sighed. "Because I should have helped the others. I stayed silent too long, but not this time." Zulekha clutched the letter to her chest. Her mind raced. The woman in the letter tried to run alone and failed. She couldn't make that same mistake. She needed to plan, to be smarter, to be quiet, and most of all, she needed Yamba. For the first time in weeks, Zulekha felt something other than despair. She felt fire. It was faint, but it burned. She had been lied to, locked away, and watched like a criminal. But now she had an ally, a woman who had been hiding strength behind silence. Together, they would find a way. Outside, the mansion remained quiet. Inside, two women sat in the dark, planning a future they couldn't yet see, but one they were ready to fight for. Zulekha knew she couldn't show even a flicker of fear. So, she played the role of the perfect wife. Every morning she greeted Kilonzo with a soft smile. She cooked his favorite meals, nodded at his cruel commands, and laughed at his jokes. But behind her eyes, a fire was burning. Every word she spoke, every step she took, was part of her secret plan to escape. She told Kilonzo that her body had been feeling weak, her stomach often in pain. He barely looked up from his gold-plated cup. "Rest then," he said, waving his hand as if dismissing a servant. That was all she needed. Time alone in her room. Yamba became her partner in silence. From her old stash of herbs, they carefully chose roots that could cause deep sleep without suspicion. Night after night, Zulekha practiced the right amount, making sure it would not kill him, only keep him down long enough for their escape. On the 7th night, the moon was full, casting long shadows across the walls of the mansion. Zulekha prepared a heavy stew and sprinkled the sleeping powder inside. She placed it before Kilonzo with a sweet smile. "You work so hard. Eat and rest tonight." He slurped it down without question, unaware that his lies were about to catch up with him. Hours passed. When Kilonzo finally stumbled to his bed, his eyes grew heavy. Moments later, loud snores echoed through the halls. It was time. Zulekha moved quickly but quietly. Her heart pounded in her chest. Yamba joined her with a small bag of dried herbs, water, and a change of clothes. They crept through the dark halls, past the guards who dozed at their posts. When they reached the main gates, hope surged in Zulekha's chest, but it was crushed just as quickly. The iron gates were locked, not just locked, but sealed with a thick chain and a golden padlock. Kilonzo had been smarter than she thought. He kept the key on him at all times. Zulekha's hands trembled. "What do we do now?" she whispered. Yamba looked around, thinking fast. "There's another way, through the servants' tunnel. It's hidden behind the pantry, but we must hurry." With no time to waste, they turned back. Every step felt like a race against time. One wrong sound, one wrong move, and everything would fall apart. Behind them, the mansion remained quiet, but Zulekha knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. She didn't just want freedom anymore. She wanted to expose every lie, every trick Kilonzo used, and she was just getting started. The sun had barely risen when Zulekha and Yamba made their move. With the stolen key clutched tightly in her hand, Zulekha led the way to the hidden servants' tunnel, the air cool and damp as they crawled through the narrow passage. Yamba followed closely, her heart pounding in her chest. Every footstep seemed louder than the last, but Zulekha knew there was no turning back now. This was their only chance. As the tunnel opened into the woods near Dambara, Zulekha took a deep breath. The air smelled like freedom, a feeling she hadn't known in so long. She looked at Yamba, who nodded in silent understanding. They were almost there. Meanwhile, back in the mansion, Kilonzo awoke to the silence of an empty bed. His eyes shot open, and panic set in. The room was eerily quiet. No Zulekha, no sign of where she'd gone. His mind raced as he jumped out of bed and searched the house. When he discovered the missing key and the locked gates, he exploded in rage. His first instinct was to send his guards after her, but Zulekha was already too far gone. They wouldn't catch her. She had outsmarted him. By the time Kilonzo's guards reached the village of Dambara, it was too late. The villagers had already gathered in the town square, whispering, gossiping, and waiting for Zulekha. They had seen her return, and they could feel the tension in the air. Zulekha stood at the front of the crowd, her chest heavy with the weight of the truth she was about to tell. The villagers, who once whispered about her future with a prince, now watched her with a mix of curiosity and concern. Zulekha raised her voice, clear and strong, as she began to speak. "He lied to me. He trapped me in his lies. He promised me love, but all he wanted was control." Her voice broke with emotion as she recounted everything. The lies, the manipulation, and the torment she had suffered. "I was nothing but a pawn in his game, a prize to be won. But now, I've escaped, and I will never go back." The crowd listened in stunned silence, then erupted in fury. They had always trusted Kilonzo. They had seen him as a wealthy, powerful man, someone who would protect them. But now, they understood the truth. The news spread like wildfire, reaching even the distant lands of Logera. Kilonzo's business partners, who had once lined up to work with him, quickly severed ties. Clients who had been loyal to him for years pulled out of deals. The empire he had built, one based on lies and manipulation, crumbled within days. The wealth he had once flaunted was now nothing but ashes. Zulekha's escape had sparked a chain reaction that destroyed Kilonzo's carefully crafted world. And as she stood in the center of Dambara, surrounded by the people who now saw her not as a victim, but as a warrior, she felt a strange sense of peace. She had lost so much, but in that moment she realized she had gained something far more powerful: her freedom, her truth, and the strength to stand tall. Zulekha's return to Dambara wasn't just a homecoming, it was a rebirth. The village that once saw her as a quiet healer now looked at her with awe and respect. The woman who had been broken by lies and betrayal had turned her pain into power, transforming her struggles into a beacon of hope. She had lost so much, but in the end, she gained everything that truly mattered: her strength, her voice, and her purpose. With the small savings she had managed to keep hidden from Kilonzo, Zulekha set out to create something extraordinary. She opened the House of Hope, a safe haven for women who had suffered in silence, much like she had. It was a place where they could learn, grow, and reclaim their lives. A space to nurture their minds and bodies, where healing wasn't just a physical act, but a spiritual journey. Women from every corner of the land came to seek her guidance, drawn by the strength they saw in her eyes. Yamba, the quiet and loyal housemaid who had helped Zulekha escape from Kilonzo's clutches, was by her side every step of the way. Together, they transformed the once small space into a flourishing center, where the women who trained there felt empowered to build their own futures. Yamba's steady presence was a constant reminder to Zulekha that she was never alone, even in her darkest moments. As the days passed, more and more girls from villages near and far came to the House of Hope. Some came seeking knowledge, others came seeking refuge, but all of them left with something they had never expected: the courage to dream. Under Zulekha's guidance, they learned the ancient art of healing, the power of resilience, and the strength that lived within each of them. Zulekha's teachings weren't just about medicine. They were about self-worth, independence, and the fierce belief that no one, not even the cruelest man, could steal their power. Every time a woman walked out of the House of Hope with her head held high, Zulekha's heart swelled with pride. She had become the teacher she never thought she could be, a mentor to those who needed her most. What was once a place of pain and fear was now a place of empowerment and change. One day, as she stood at the entrance of the House of Hope, Zulekha looked out over the land that had once held her captive. The winds seemed to carry whispers of the past, of betrayal, of heartbreak. But now, those whispers were no longer a source of pain. They were the wind beneath her wings. What they meant for harm, Zulekha said quietly. Her gaze fixed on the horizon, became the wind beneath my... And with that, she smiled, knowing that she had turned the darkest chapter of her life into a story of triumph, not just for herself, but for every woman who walked through her doors. One stormy night, as the rain poured over the village of Dambara, the unthinkable news came. Kilonzo, the man who had once deceived and trapped Zulekha, had been arrested. His world came crashing down as he was charged with fraud, abuse, and the lies that had built his empire. The mansion, the riches, the false life he had carefully crafted, all came crumbling down around him. In prison, he was no longer the wealthy heir, but a common man, left to face the consequences of his own deceit. No servants brought him food, no riches shielded him from his fate, and no wife stood by his side. He was truly alone. As the days dragged on in his cold, desolate cell, Kilonzo wrote a letter to Zulekha, hoping for a shred of forgiveness, a glimmer of the woman he had once tricked. His words were full of regret, pleading for her to forgive him for the lies, for the pain he had caused. But Zulekha had long since moved on, her life filled with purpose and strength. She was no longer the fragile woman he had once manipulated. She was a force, changing the lives of countless others, lifting them up from the darkness he had once cast them into. Kilonzo's letter was left unanswered. Zulekha was too busy building the House of Hope, empowering women, and creating the change she had always dreamed of. She had long since found her purpose, and there was no room for the past in her future. As she focused on her work, her heart remained free from the chains of the man who had tried to trap her. And so, Kilonzo, once a man of great wealth and influence, was left to face the harsh reality of his actions. His empire crumbled, his lies were exposed, and he was now a prisoner of his own making. The very chains he had tried to bind Zulekha with became his own shackle. He had thought he could manipulate the world, but in the end, it was his lies that had trapped him. As the rain continued to fall, the villagers of Dambara whispered about Kilonzo's fall from grace, but Zulekha remained silent. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to speak. Her life was already speaking for. He tricked her into marriage, but ended up a prisoner of his own lies. Zulekha's story teaches us that the truth may walk slowly, but it always reaches the finish line. No matter how long it takes, the truth will always find its way to the light, and when it does, it has the power to change everything. Zulekha's journey is a powerful reminder that no matter how deep the lies or how grand the deception, the truth will always rise to the surface. Her strength, resilience, and ability to turn her pain into purpose shows us that no obstacle is too great to overcome. Kilonzo thought he could control her, but in the end, it was his own lies that trapped him. If Zulekha's story moved you, reminded you of the power of truth, or inspired you to stand tall in the face of adversity, then you're not alone. We all have moments in life when we feel trapped by the lies of others. But like Zulekha, we have the power to break free and create something beautiful from the pain. If you found strength in Zulekha's story, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales of resilience and triumph. Thank you for being part of our community. Your support means the world to us. Together, let's spread hope, one story at a time. Stay strong, keep fighting, and remember, the truth always finds its way.